Call of Duty safe, but not the way you think. We're not talking about this Call of Duty. We're not talking about these Call of Duties. We're talking about some of the older Call of Duties that were previously unplayable until the recent update that Microsoft put out that now allow you to play the original COD 4 Modern Warfare, not the remastered version with all that microtransaction nonsense. You can play World at War in its original form, as well as Modern Warfare 2, BO1, MW3 and BO2 on the original consoles. Up until this point, a lot of these previous titles had huge issues with matchmaking or hackers in infested lobbies where they were kind of taking over the way that people used to have modded consoles. And currently pretty much all you could play naturally was Ghost up until the current COD. You can load up those games on whatever platform, load up, and you can pretty much get into a match. As you go further back, it might take a little bit longer, but with the recent update to Microsoft, you're able to play all of these older Call of Duties. And this is kind of cool because a lot of people haven't really had a chance to play with them because they've been broken for so long. I know that I've done several series on the channel where we looked at rifles in every COD or whatever the case is. And when I had to jump on, it was really a pain to get any kind of gameplay. And that's kind of been solved. But one thing that people don't necessarily realize is when they look back, they're like, man, it looks so bad and blah, blah, blah. It's because they didn't really experience it. Not that we thought the graphics were great back then, because I promise you, I didn't think the graphics were great back then. One of the things that separated COD and allowed it to be put on the map was that all of its games run at 60 FPS. Maybe not the current one with that FPS bug. I think that's fixed now. But in general, you're supposed to have Call of Duty run at 60 FPS. And on console, that was a huge deal. This is something Call of Duty set themselves apart. Whereas their competition, other games like Battlefield went in for 30 FPS, but better looking games didn't tend to excel quite as much. They also innovated in the FPS genre, especially when it comes to console play, and allowed you to have a ton of new features, starting with COD 4 Modern Warfare. And if you guys are a little bit unfamiliar with how much that game added, keep in mind that this is the first Call of Duty with perks, first Call of Duty with camos, first Call of Duty with kill streaks, even though they only had 3 of them. They had a prestige system, which allowed you to keep that grind going. First time having attachment for weapons, and those unlocked through challenges as well. And then they had overall challenges. They also introduced a hardcore mode, which serves a very specific community that loves that type of content. Overall, Call of Duty kind of set the mark of them being the fast-paced arcade shooter. And back then, keep it in mind that you really didn't have all the modern niceties that we have in the game today, whether it's unlimited sprint, especially later on we get some of those options with the pro perks or whatever the case. But in general, Modern Warfare didn't have all those things when it first came out, and it is definitely dated when you look back, but even further dated for the example that it gave you with the 60 FPS, where they intentionally took lower quality games, even for the time, to get that 60 FPS so the game played smoother than pretty much all their competitors. Then the next year they came out with World at War, and this was actually a little bit of a more simplistic game. They didn't have much flair. Obviously, with being World at War, it was an older style game. It did introduce zombies though. That started a whole new genre of games for specific niche of players as well. So they were, revolutionary in bringing this mode to life, even though that was super bare bones. There was almost nothing there. There wasn't Easter eggs or really any of that stuff until much later on. They also scrapped the camos, so there wasn't even camos in the game, and you unlocked attachments the same way you did in COD 4 Modern Warfare, with using a specific weapon and completing a specific challenge to get the desired attachment. Use that one and you pretty much could only equip the one. We couldn't equip more than one until much later on. Then what set it up for even to have the nuclear launch was MW2. This kind of really put Call of Duty kind of on the map. They added a callable nuke that worked with your kills, all of them counting. So a lot of people would use a kill streak to get their next kill streak. That would get their nuke, and they combine all of that. And that was something a lot of people did, and that's how they got their first nuke. You essentially only needed to go on a 10 kill streak or so, and then you would get your nuke because you can get that if you were on the right map. They also added a streak selection system. Prior to this, with World at War, you only had 3. Obviously you can go with the dogs or whatever the case was, that it would come out, which they later incorporated a lot of these streak systems into the later CODs. That's kind of where we get all those kill streaks, score streaks that we see today. Modern Warfare 2 also added Spec Ops, which is kind of another side mode that kind of competed with zombies. Unfortunately, they didn't really stick with it the same way. Obviously, we have the Spec Ops and the raids, which is kind of like an offshoot of that, but nothing near the extent that we saw with Spec Ops back in the day. They also added pro perks, so you can actually grind out your perks, get better versions of those, which is nice. They added death streaks, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, but they were in that game and they were kind of a problem at times. They also added first real cosmetics where you get emblems and calling cards to kind of show off some of your achievements in game. And I think that obviously leads to trash talk. Hey, I got this calling card. I got this, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, I got the eraser one. That means I reset my stat. Then that brings us over to BO1, which took a lot of these systems, but it was obviously made by Treyarch. They were able to expand on the zombies experience with the pack-a-punch, perk machines, as well as the different Easter eggs that are associated with that, with the various maps that they added, and became like very iconic maps in the genre that a lot of people refer to it, you know, as good in the genre, right? They also added wagers where you could bet people for in-game currency, which you would later use to be able to buy attachments for your gun, since weapon leveling still wasn't a thing. They also had theater mode where you can go ahead and look back at your gameplays. They had contracts that you can swap out that would allow you to earn more currency, which would allow you to buy your attachments in game. That's kind of how they added that. They also added bots to private match in the form of combat training, pretty much in addition to everything we had, but obviously Treyarch at this point didn't do callable nukes, so we don't have that in there, but pretty much expanded on that. Pretty all-around good game. One of my favorites, I think, just because of the simplicity. I think it gets outshined pretty quickly by some the next two Call of Duties, which I think are the two best in the franchise, which are Modern Warfare 3 coming up next, and then obviously BO2 towards the end of that. But MW3, they added the specialist bonus. They changed up the callable nuke, made it a little bit harder to obtain. Still had to go on a kill streak, but it was all player kills. The kill streaks couldn't assist you in getting there. They also introduced weapon leveling as a straightforward method to be able to unlock your specific attachments and modify the way the camos were. So MW3 improved a lot on what MW2 lacked. It had great maps overall. It was almost like a copy and paste, but if you had something good and you kind of modified it, personally, I prefer MW3 where it ended out. They had all kinds of different streak systems. With the specialists, it just was next level. Then you get to BO2, which introduced the pick 10 system, which I think is the best system. If we went back to something like MW3 where it's super simplistic, and even maybe more recently World War II had kind of more simplistic setup, that's cool. But I do like the pick 10 system, the freedom and restriction that provides to allow you to kind of have to pick and choose what makes the most sense. If you don't want a lethal, then there's no lethal spam. If you don't want tactical, there's no tactical spam, because people will value more perks and attachments or whatever the case is. If you want a secondary, you have a launcher, then you kind of got to use your perks that way. They also added ranked play, which was the first time in the form of league play. They added custom emblems where you can make your own emblems. In terms of cosmetics, they also introduced the first DLC gun. Up until this point, for the entirety of the year, the weapons they started with were the same weapons from beginning to end for the entire year. There was no seasonal drops like that. Even though there were map packs, they didn't introduce new weapons until BO2, which is kind of the formula we have now. Without that, we wouldn't have the 3 or 4 weapons per season, which ends up being roughly 15 to 20 weapons added onto the base game. That was never a thing until BO2 launched that with the Peacekeeper. Obviously, that was a paid concept back then, and now they're all accessible free to play. So some great games available. They're all super discounted for another week or so. So you can go in there, get them for about 15 bucks, whatever your favorite is. You can get all of them if you want. Not very expensive when you kind of look at the big scheme of things. You're going to put some time in it. Super easy to queue up. You can load up. I think most of them are under about 25 seconds, with the exception of World at War. If you do not get DLC, it will kick you out of a queue if one of the DLC map pops up. I don't know why there's systems like that, that you don't have a special set playlist, but overall, a great time. I'm looking forward to playing a little bit more. If you'd like to see more gameplay from any of these, let me know in the comment section. Which was your favorite? Appreciate y'all supporting the content. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.